Isn't it a fantastic day today outside? I walked up along the waterfront feeling very windswept and wishing I was living back in Wellington. It's just wonderful. Today, I'm going to talk about the new normal, building careers in an aging and indebted economy. I'm not going to talk too much about how to fix these issues. I'm just going to present you with some of the demographic and economic trends that workforces will face and what it might mean for people in the careers industry, I suppose. Now, one of the reasons I'm really pleased to be here is what you do really matters to me. As an employer, we have 10 people working at interest.co.nz. I really care about the people we have. Are they going to stay? Are we doing the right things for them? Are we building their careers? And secondly, as a father, I have a 17-year-old daughter and I have an 8-year-old daughter. And I lived overseas for 10 years, came back to New Zealand to have those kids grow up here. And if you take one thing away from my presentation today is, where are your grandkids going to grow up? For me, this is a question I ask myself every day. In fact, it's the reason I get out of bed. Where are my grandkids going to grow up? So I thought I'd introduce you to a couple of people. This is, and there's some people here at Careers NZ who know about at least one of these people. And I want to explain some of the issues through their eyes. Firstly, the one on the left is Eilish. Eilish is my 17-year-old daughter. She's wonderful. I love it a bit. She's a Nine Inch Nails fan. Does anyone know Nine Inch Nails? They are a pretty hard metal group. They, when I heard them again, because actually my career started off as, I should have been a farmer really. I should have been an economist, maybe a farming economist. I did agricultural economics at Massey University, and then I got into student radio. And so I actually fell in love with Nine Inch Nails too, back in 1991, 92, when they were starting. So when I discovered that she was a fan, I was thrilled to bits. She is a computer geek. She's a bit of a gamer. She just loves computers and talking to her friends on, not necessarily Facebook, that's way too uncool. She's into other things called DeviantArt. And she's just at that stage now where she is thinking about careers, although we had to really prompt her. She wasn't really in the mood. And we're now in the process of thinking how she goes to Auckland University, and she's got a part-time job as a librarian. There are 150 people who applied for that part-time job. She got it. We were thrilled to bits. Part-time to work her through university. Now, the person on the right, I don't actually know who this is. This seems a strange thing to do. The reason I don't know who this is I don't have a picture of the person I want to talk about, but this person went through the limited service volunteer course. So Anatoly talked about that and how successful it's been. Now I want to talk about a person who was on this course and who promptly sat down next to me on a plane a couple of weeks ago. I don't move in as wide a circles as I should. I don't talk to everyone. I talk to a lot of economists and ministers and CEOs and technologists and that sort of thing. This young girl, actually, but she was a bit of a tomboy, so I put a picture of a boy up who'd been on the course. She was fascinating. She was buzzing. She was thrilled about something she'd just done. She sat down to me and she had this mobile phone and she flicked through it. She just sat down and started talking. You know, I was looking forward to a bit of a quiet time on the plane, and she just plonked herself down and said, "Hey, I've just had a fantastic 5 weeks." And I thought, yeah, good. And then the sort of journalist in me kicked in and I said, okay, tell me about it. And I don't often have a chance to talk to young people who aren't my daughters. And so I started to tease her out and find out what she was so thrilled about. She talked about how, as Anatoly said, she got up early in the morning. She did her own ironing. She, did all these things with her friends. She got all these friends. And she took out her mobile phone and started showing me all these pictures of all these people, these friends, the people who had told her what to do, all the people at the army people. She was over the moon. While she was doing this, she was swigging from a 1.5-litre bottle of Coke that she'd taken onto the plane. And she had a packet of cigarettes there, and If she was allowed to smoke one, she would have, I'm pretty sure. She told me how her life had been pretty messy. Her mum was a street kid. She'd been in and out of school. Turned out she'd been in jail at various points in her life. She was 17. She explained to me how she realised she had some anger management issues. And it turned out she'd just been kicked off the course. She'd been there for 5 weeks. But she was thrilled to bits, and she was sure she'd get back on the course again once she'd sorted out, as she said, her shit. She was a wonderful kid. She was so enthusiastic about the world, so keen to get on with it. And so I started talking to her about, what are you going to do? What do you want to do with your life? And she wasn't quite sure, but she really wanted to be in the army now. She wanted to be a gunner or something. She wasn't sure because no one had really sat down with her and talked to her about it. And I said, well, what are you going to do after you get off the plane? You're going to go and talk to your folks or something? It turned out she was living with her auntie. She hadn't really gotten on with her mum for a while, and her dad had left. And didn't know her dad. She had 16 brothers and sisters, mostly half brothers and sisters. Her father had kids with 3 or 4 mums. And you could see this. She'd had a pretty tough start in life. And she had it all ahead of her. And it wasn't going to be easy, I could see. And I asked her, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? I said, she wanted to go to America. Why is that? Because she was a good singer. She loved kapa haka. She was into her touch footy. She was a bit of a tomboy. She was a really interesting character. Another 17-year-old. 2 17-year-olds. And what I'm going to talk about today will focus on those 2 17-year-olds. I'll have a lot of charts, and there'll be a lot of economic stuff, but always think back to these 2 people, because that's what I do when I get up every morning. And it occurred to me we have some issues, mostly with the one on the right, maybe with the one on the left too. And another family snapshot. I like to show pictures of my family. This is my mum. I'm going to come back to this later on. This is a really important one. Doesn't look very exciting. And I'll ask you to have a look at this picture for 10 seconds now. Look at it. Think about the details in it. And I'll come back to you and ask you why the details are important, what matters in this picture. I'm going to talk about a legacy of debt that our young people will inherit and what that might mean for them and their motivations for work. The legacy of debt, how it will affect the economy, how that changes the types of work that's around. I'm going to talk about how our workforce is aging and what that means for many New Zealanders, and particularly for our young people, because they know this is happening. They know it's happening, and they're not quite that keen on what it means for them. I'm going to talk about New Zealand's hollowed-out workforce and what that means for our tax base and the sort of challenges we're going to face over the next 20 to 30 years in finding jobs for people, making sure the skills are in the right place, and what that means for our economy. We've got some real challenges, I think, and I'm going to talk about those today. And then I'm going to talk about los indignados. Who here has heard about los indignados? Hold that thought. I'll come back to los indignados. I'm told you need to do a joke whenever you do a presentation at the start, and the best thing to do is to make fun of yourself. Because I was trained as an economist, I like to make fun of myself and my relatives. Why did God create economists? To make weather forecasters look good. My second cousin is Jim Hickey, so I've also made fun of him. Now, this is a core part of the presentation today. The grown-ups, you and me, because I'm 44, we went on a spending spree, and we will leave our kids with a debt mountain. And don't they know it? They think about it a lot. Particularly as they start to get into that career building phase, first job, thinking about family, houses. Boy, they know it. And we've got a real issue here, particularly with intergenerational wealth transfer. Now, to give you a sense, I'm going to throw some charts in here. This presentation is available for everyone. You can do your thing. I like to use them as a bit of a pointer, really. This chart shows New Zealand's foreign debt, and it also explains how we went on a borrowing spree, the grown-ups. This is what the grown-ups did to New Zealand. About 2001, 2002, house prices started rising. We started feeling wealthier. The economy seemed good, so we started putting more money into houses. We borrowed it from overseas. As we bought houses, we did them up. Then our house value went up, and we thought, time to go for a holiday. I feel rich. I'm off. Flat screen TV. And we borrowed it. We borrowed about $100 billion between 2001 and 2007-8. Most of the people who borrowed that were in their 30s, 40s, maybe into their 50s. So that group. And our net foreign debt, or net foreign asset position, fell from 75% of GDP to 90%. Remember that number, 90% of GDP. That's really important. And it's a real problem for us. And actually, it's forecast to get a lot worse, to go to 100% of GDP. 100% of GDP is a real problem. Now, we're not the only ones who did this. This is debt, just to show it's a household problem. It's in the houses. Housing is really important. We're the black line, all black line. Our debt to disposable income ratio rose from about 120% to 150, 160% over that period. Remember that time when the grown-ups went on a spending spree? But we weren't the only ones. This is not just a New Zealand issue. It's around the world. The United States, actually, has actually started to reduce it. They've actually started their deleveraging process. We haven't really yet. Interestingly, Australia has the same problem. And that's one good thing about our situation. The UK has a really big problem there. What happened to that money? What happened to that $100 billion of foreign borrowing? It went straight into house prices. This is New Zealand's housing stock as a percentage of GDP. So it's actually taking into account the growth in the economy. So it actually shows you how much value has been pumped into houses. Now, we don't have twice as many houses. They're not twice as good. They don't have twice as many bedrooms. In fact, some of them are leaky. Yet they're worth twice as much. That doesn't make sense. What happened? Well, we pumped $100 billion of foreign debt into our housing values. It meant we've got overvalued houses. Now, the shaded line, this is from the Reserve Bank. Shaded line here shows you the amount of over or undervaluation. So 0 means if house prices were there, there'd be no overvaluation. Through the late 2000s, house prices went berserk. Overvaluation went to around 30%. It's come back a bit. It's a little bit better. But according to the Reserve Bank, house prices are still at least 10% overvalued. Why is this important? Because New Zealand's young people want a future. They want the same future we have. They want to get a job, have some fun, maybe get jacked up, get married, have a house, bit of a backyard, some kids, the same old stuff, really. But now, particularly in our biggest cities, they can't afford to do it. They might be able to afford an apartment. They might be able to buy the house, but have so much debt. They've inherited the debt from the previous owner, who's very happy to sell it to them. And now they really worry about housing. Whenever you talk to a 23-year-old, 25-year-old, someone with a bit of an education, some skills, late 20s, what do they start talking to you after 5 minutes? How they really can't afford a house, just like their parents did. And they've got some debt themselves. This is the student debt around. So, it's been rising, 20 billion or so in 1992. Remember, there was no student debt before that. The baby boomers went through university and didn't pay any money for their fees. No debt. It was free. It was fantastic. Now this generation have had to pay high fees and they started taking on student debt. Now, this is when it really took off. Why was that? Because it was made interest-free. And now there's about, every year, about 1.2, 1.3 billion extra is borrowed. That's a significant issue. So, what are people doing? I'll come back to this again, but this chart, I'll try and explain it. It's a bit of a Christmas cake, but we'll get there. So, 1996 is the unshaded part. This is the New Zealand population, male, female, in the age groups 15 to 25 or so. shaded group. And then it's taken 10 years later. So between 1996 and 2006, the population changed. Now, if it all stayed in New Zealand, those bars would have moved up in tandem and there wouldn't be any gaps. The trouble is, there are some big gaps opening up. This is 1996 to 2006. I think it's actually gotten quite a bit worse since then. This is the latest data I could find. By the way, Natalie Jackson at Waikato University is very good on this, if you're looking for info. A big chunk of the population is missing in that 20 to 24 shifting up into the mid-30s. They left. Let's hope they come back. And what type of jobs might they have when they do get back? I use this chart to try and explain how the economy has changed in the last decade or so and what it might mean for jobs, what types of jobs there might be, structure of our economy, and frankly how unsustainable it is. Now what happened when we went on this, the grown-ups went on a spending spree, was that we borrowed money from offshore, we helped push up the currency, and we really hit our exporters hard, particularly those manufacturing exporters. And all sorts of high-value export jobs went. This chart shows you that the light grey line is the non-tradable sector. So when you say non-tradable, that means parts of the economy that don't compete with the rest of the world. They're not exporting, they're not competing with imports. You really can't, you have to do it here. You've got no choice. Now that includes things like government, financial services, real estate, a whole bunch of communications. You can't go out and buy a phone from a phone service from a foreigner. You can't use someone else's government. We have to use our one. That's the non-tradable sector. And through the mid-2000s and into late 2000s, it grew very strongly because we had a very high currency during that time and because some decisions were made at a government level and elsewhere, and the housing market was booming. So a lot of people went into the non-tradable sector. Tradable sector really struggled and has done for the last decade or so. What does that mean? Quite a few high-valued, interesting jobs in exporting just disappeared. They've gone. This is Natalie Jackson. If you're looking for research on demographics in New Zealand, she's very good. This is the thing that really makes me a little bit nervous. By 2020, the number of new labour force entrants will be surpassed by the numbers retiring. So think about that. As more people come into the workforce, let's say 20 people come into the workforce, 20 people go out. Now, it's not normally like that. At the moment, I think it's about 15 entering and 10 or 12 leaving type thing. So we've got this problem of having enough people to do the work and supporting those people who are needing support. And this is a chart showing how over the next 30 to 40 years, the ratio, we call the dependency ratio, is going to get much worse. So the blue line at the top, there's various different ways you can measure this. The blue line at the top shows the proportion of the population that needs supporting. So on pensions, on sickness beneficiary, the sickness benefits, they're not on the workforce, they need to be supported with some sort of benefit or are being supported by the super or something like that. Currently it's about 45%, so that means 55% have to do the work to support that 45%. Now, as the baby boomers age, that proportion obviously rises. So it goes from 45% to 60% in 2060. It's around here it really starts to move, 2030, 2040. So we'll end up with 40% of the population supporting 60% of the population. And our young people know it. They know what it means. Particularly when you've got people retiring at 65 and then going into the health system, which is paid for by the public, i.e. the taxpayer. And who's going to be paying those taxes? People who are working at that time. And there's going to be an awful lot of, unfortunately, old sick people, probably including me, although I'm not likely to be as sick as I used to be, which is good. Here we go. This is the baby boomers. That'll move forward. They'll get old, and unfortunately they'll get sick, and they'll use the healthcare system. Because we have a free healthcare system, free as in publicly provided, and a universal super, that is going to cause a lot of problems. Now, this is a haiku, and I give all credit to Andrew Coleman. Does anyone here know Andrew Coleman? He's an economist at Motu here in Wellington. He does some great research on aging and the relationship between the young and the old, and in particular, how it affects housing. And he has this great haiku. The young pay taxes, so the old live in mansions they wanted when young. This is where the aging story and the housing story come together. So right now we've got some pretty wealthy 40, 50, 60-year-olds who owned houses before 2002 or bought them just in time, and maybe they're quite leveraged. So they actually made enormous capital gains, untaxed by the way, through that period. They're wealthy, and they're in their 3-4 bedroom house in the suburbs, got a bit of a backyard, maybe brought up the kids, but like me, we've got a backyard. I've got 2 kids who are going to go into the workforce. And I don't want to leave that house. I quite like it. I don't want to sell it. And there'll come a time when maybe I want to move into an apartment or something. But who wants to live in an apartment, you know? So I'm going to hold on to that house. And it's going to get really valuable because prices still seem to keep going up. And my daughter's going to graduate, and she probably doesn't want to buy our house, right? But she does probably want to buy a house at some stage. And Andrew Coleman has done some great research showing that what is likely to happen is not this mass transfer of assets of housing from the old to the young. What's actually going to happen is that the old will buy the apartments with the equity in their houses, leveraged up from the loan from the bank. They will stay in their 3-4 bedroom houses because they like to have the grandkids around, right? And then they'll rent out those apartments to the young, or the rental of property or whatever it is. So the young will pay taxes, so the old live in mansions they wanted when young. The other piece of the story is that the young won't be able to afford to buy housing. Housing affordability is a huge issue for the young, and something that anyone thinking about careers and workforces and pay and all that sort of stuff should take account of. And at the moment, the demographic trends are saying the young will become increasingly grumpy. A, because they know they're about to inherit all this debt that the grown-ups just splurted on. It stopped rising, by the way, which is good. And they won't be able to afford to buy a house. So they'll have to wait for someone to cark it before it happens. Which leaves hollowed out New Zealand. Now, this comes back to my conversation on the plane with the 17-year-old girl. Boy, I wish her well. She walked out the plane, up the bridge, and I could see her. She was so buzzed. You know, it wasn't just the Coke. It wasn't just the lollies. She got a hand. You know how you go on the plane and they have the basket full of lollies? And being, you know, very conservative and middle class, I just take one lolly. I like the lollies. She took a whole handful of it. It's great. She was buzzed up on the Coke and the lollies, and she was about to go out and have a cigarette. And she was texting her mates as she left. Mad texter. She showed me all these photos on her phone. It's great. Anyway, New Zealand's, I think many will have seen this chart. It's right at the heart of our basic problem. John Key used to talk about it a lot. Not so much now. The red line, the gap between New Zealand and Australian GDP per capita, which eventually translates into wages, you'd hope, and it does pretty much. The yellow line is our net outflow of people from New Zealand to Australia. And this is going back to 1947. So there's some interesting history here. I'm old. I remember Robert Muldoon. You know, the line about, what was it? When the people who leave, that increases the intelligence on both sides. Anyway, big outflow here, Muldoon. Another one late in the 80s again. Then it all seemed to get better. I actually came back to New Zealand in 2004, which was one of those good times. And then it really came off again in 2008. It turned up again, it got better, 2009, but it's falling again. So there's a lot of New Zealanders leaving to live in Australia. There's a risk here that We are creating an economy with lots of low-value jobs. An economy with lots of people earning money and paying quite a bit of it in taxes to pay for the others they need to support. That chart showing the export sector being killed off in the last decade, I keep showing it to ministers and economists and people, politicians, and hey, we've got a problem. We're killing our export sector, the one that creates all the jobs and earns us the money to service the debt. Hey. And they go, isn't it great the currency's so high? I can buy an iPad. Fantastic. It only costs me $800. I can go on holiday, Fiji this year. Brilliant. And you know what? There are more consumers and voters than there are exporters. So John Key actually likes a high currency. But what does it mean? It means we have fewer high-paid, interesting jobs. Back to the issue of a grumpy youth. Who here has heard of Los Indignados? Los Indignados is a youth movement sweeping Europe right now. Very angry people, often well-educated, young, early 20s, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Greece. They're very angry. They're angry with lots of things, but for good reason. They're angry with their leaders. They're angry with their parents. They're angry that they're about to inherit broken economies. Economies where they can't get jobs, but the people who are in work are keeping their jobs. Now, there's a few differences. Obviously, in places like Spain and France, people get jobs for life. You can't sack them. And particularly if you work for government or something like that, you'll never lose your job and you get a fantastic pension. In Greece, you can retire at 50 on like 90% of your salary. It's fantastic. Railway workers in Greece get $100,000 a year. That's the job I want. And I can retire at 50 on $90,000 a year and buy an island. It'd be great. But the youth now can't get jobs. And if there are jobs, they tend to be short jobs, like contract jobs, or jobs in the services sector. And, bar staff. You ever been to Queenstown lately? Full of Spaniards and Irish and, Portuguese and Brazilians. And why is that? Well, Queenstown's a nice place, but because they can't get jobs in their own country. They are grumpy. And interestingly, they are following the recipe set for them by a 90-year-old concentration camp victim from France. This guy wrote a book called The Rage of the Indignant, in which he said it's time to rise up and protest and be angry about what's happened to you, about how you've been landed with all this debt that you're going to have to repay, that the banks are in control of your economy, that you can't get jobs, that this great future that seemed to be out there is gone for you. Be angry, be indignant, he says. Los Indignados. That's how it's sort of spread around Europe. So there are now people camped in squares in Spain, Portugal, and Greece, Syntagma Square in Athens, Madrid, Barcelona, starting to happen in Paris. And it's summer, so it's great. And they're camped out. They're camped out in the squares. They haven't got jobs, so they're just camped out and they're protesting. Los Indignados. They're young and they're angry. One more chart. This is my favourite. You know how I said, remember 90% of GDP, 100% of GDP? That's our debt, New Zealand's debt. This is minus 100% of GDP. This is the amount of public debt. These are the groups of countries right now who are in the nearly 100% of GDP debt camp. Greece, Portugal, Hungary, Spain, Ireland, New Zealand. Pigs. I'm trying to make up a new phrase. Pigs. New Zealand. We're in the wrong company. And we're not the only ones. There's a lot of debt out there. And this is part of the issue I'm trying to say. There is a generation of people graduating. They know this. They know there's a bunch of baby boomers retiring, and they're going to have to pay for them. And they're going to inherit the debt. And the way they'll inherit the debt is either it'll be forced on them in some form, probably from the private sector to the public sector. That's what happened in Ireland. The banks defaulted and it all came back onto the taxpayer, and that's how they pay for it. Or you choose to take on the debt. You buy the really expensive house and you get the 80% mortgage, and you're a wage slave to the banks for the next 40 years. And this is where I get a little bit controversial. I think New Zealand needs to take back New Zealand. We need to stop being tenants in our own land, because that's what we are now. This is a chart showing the New Zealand drain of interest payments and profits on New Zealand-owned companies. It's gone from 2% in the 1970s to 8%, and obviously around here we took on a lot of extra debt, and that's the interest payments, and it's growing. So that means that before we get to use the money we've got, and use our GDP that we produce, we have to pay the master, pay the bank, pay the foreign owner. Right? I used to work for one of those companies, Fairfax Media. Great company, but I used to be on the executive team and watch how much money used to go out every week across the Tasman that wasn't reinvested here. I put up lots of proposals to invest in things because it was my country and I wanted to employ some people. Nope, not good enough. Had to go back to Australia. So what does that mean? Our gross national income per capita has been falling since 2003, even though our GDP has been rising. So we're producing more stuff, but we have to pay more and more of it out to the foreigners before we get to keep it. What does that mean? Even though our economy is growing, our wages aren't. And if they're not growing, actually, when you look at the stats, it does show that our wages are growing. Why is that? Because we're borrowing even more to top them up. In fact, that's what I think working for families was. It was a big government subsidy to account for the fact that our real wages weren't growing. So, young and angry, right? I did this exercise early this morning. So in Spain and Greece, they're young and angry, they protest. They go into the streets and they yell and they shout. They're good at protesting in Greece, they throw things. It's fantastic. Fire bombs, it's great. New Zealand, how do the young protest in New Zealand? I'm going to go to airnewzealand.co.nz. This is Friday, this is today, right? This is what you can, this is Auckland to Melbourne today, $431. One way. That's how people are young and angry in our world. So, that's some pretty challenging situations. And please don't take this to mean that I'm about to go and jump off a building. I actually feel fantastic. It's a beautiful day out there. This is Wellington. So what can and should we do? Cut the debt. Basically, we've got to get our country back. We've got to save more. We've got to spend less. And that means us, the 40s, 50s, and 60-year-olds. Next time you go on a holiday, think, should I save this money? Next time you buy an iPad, should I save this money? You know, we are the me generation. I'm talking the 40s, 50s, 60-year-olds. And I'm sure the 20 and 30-year-olds are too. They're the me generation. But why didn't we hand on a better economy to our kids? We need budget surpluses. It's good to hear that there's no money left, because there isn't. And we need to do that. I've got a few ideas. We could, get rid of interest-free student loans. I think it's a dumb idea. Working for families. That would actually remove most of our budget deficit, the structural one, right now. We could get rid of our current account surpluses. Why is it when commodity prices are at record highs, we're still running a current account surplus deficit, of nearly 4 to 5%, and it's expected to grow to nearly 7%? That is nuts. We should be like hoarding the nuts. It should be autumn. You know, we've just done the harvest, we made a bunch of money, and we should be saving it, but we're not. We're spending it. I think we need some new taxes. I think we need to make sure that our budget gets into surplus. The young would actually love a land tax because it takes some of that money away from the people who are sitting on huge amounts of capital gain. We'll get a capital gains tax, maybe. Bit of debate around that at the moment. Doesn't actually take a lot of money out. Doesn't really solve the problem, although it sends a shot across the bow. Less dumb debt. Again, we shouldn't be borrowing money to give to people to go and buy 1.5 litre bottles of Coke. We need to create well-paid and interesting jobs. So, my daughter, we'll come back to her in a second. I'm probably over time, aren't I? No? Well-paid and interesting jobs. I want my daughter to have a fun job. I don't want her to work at McDonald's. She doesn't want to work at McDonald's. We're quite pleased we got her this part-time job as a librarian because it's sort of interesting. Interesting place, interesting people. She was thrilled. She's really buzzed up. It's great. But we have let our currency rise to a level where the only people who can afford to export are farmers. Now, I grew up on a dairy farm. I love farms. I wouldn't want to work on one. In fact, I don't want to work on one. I grew up near Cambridge, fantastic place. But I don't want to work on a dairy farm. And also, there aren't actually that many new jobs you can get on dairy farms. We can't actually expand our production that much without doing some really potentially ugly things involving concrete pads and sucking water out of everything. We need to create well-paid and interesting jobs. Can we do it with commodity New Zealand? John Key seems to think we can. Just the Chinese will save us, we'll be fine. I don't think so. We actually need to create a high-value New Zealand. And I talk a bit about this. I'm a bit of a late convertee to this. Green New Zealand. What are the kids passionate about? What do they really care about? Actually, it's sustainability. And there are some great stories out there. I'll just give you a brief one. I went to a conference yesterday and the day before yesterday, who I think Rick was at, who spoke. Great. Villa Maria, interesting New Zealand family-owned brand, doing great things, exporting high-quality wine, been around for decades. 20 years ago, they decided to do the sustainable thing. They went through and did an audit of all of their greenhouse gas emissions, worked out how much their freezers and their vats and their trucks and their tractors and everything was using in greenhouse gases, realised they could do 3 key things. They could, firstly, reduce their costs. If you're an exporter who doesn't export dairy products, you have to survive with low costs. So one way to reduce your cost is to reduce your carbon emissions. Secondly, they realised it motivated their staff. They got quite a few young staff. And they said, well, we can't actually afford to employ a new person to do the audit of the greenhouse gas emissions. Can you help us? And all the young people put their hands up and said, yes, we want to do this. It's great. And you know what? New Zealanders love New Zealand because it is clean and green. It is us. We're quite good at this. It's in our bones. We need to do better at it. Villa Maria are doing a great job, but really struggling with an 83-cent currency. So, I think we need to look at ways to transfer some of that wealth back from the baby boomers to the young. There's a few ways you can do that. Land tax is one way. We need to extend the retirement. I think it's going to happen anyway. People are going to work for longer. We need to really encourage the people who are working, who are older, maybe to, instead of just stopping work, continue working maybe shorter hours and working very closely with the young, mentoring. And again, we have to be intensely nationalistic and patriotic about it. I don't want to sound like Winston Peters, because I'm an internationalist. I spent 10 years overseas. I live in a part of Auckland that's so not like, you know, the rest of New Zealand. Half of the kids in my 8-year-old's class are from China. They're from India. They're from the Pacific. New Zealand is a great multicultural place. We need to embrace that internationalism. But we need to be a lot more patriotic about our assets, about our people, about our skills. And I think we need to change some things about how we run our economy so that we can employ some people. What's different about this picture? What tells you there's something wrong? This is my mum, Doreen Hickey, and her grandkids, Oscar and Toby. And they're playing. My mother is playing with her grandkids. These are my nephews. What's wrong? Anyone pick it? Right onto it. Hawthorn. Hawthorn, bloody Hawthorn. All I hear about when I talk to my brother and my nephews, Hawthorn are great. Did you see they won on the weekend? Great. These kids, there's 6 and 7, great mates. They wear the Hawthorn jersey 24 hours a day. They sleep in the bloody thing. My sister-in-law told me that she buys these clothes for these boys, right? Like really lovely clothes, groovy jeans. But they never wear them. All they wear is their Hawthorn jerseys. So there they are, playing with my mother, wearing their Hawthorn jerseys. My brother is a marketing graduate. Did his course at Auckland Uni, I think. Did quite well. Went to Perth, married a lovely lady, an Australian, still there. 2 kids, now works as a senior banker at ANZ. He's there for the duration. Another brother, who here is a basketball fan? See, I'm quite tall, so I love basketball, but I'm no good at it. But I've got a brother, Robert Hickey, who is fantastic at basketball. So good, he played for the Tall Blacks in the 2002 World Champs. You know when they got to the semi-finals? This is my main claim to fame. I am the brother of Rob Hickey, who played against Yao Ming in that quarter-final, marked him off the court. Fantastic. Now lives in Melbourne with his 2 kids. He's a teacher at a good school, really good school, does PE. Fantastic, loves it. Kids there for the duration. It's my mum. She lives in Australia. She moved there 3 months ago because she's got 5 grandkids there. I've got 2 kids here. Bugger. I came back to New Zealand so my kids could grow up here with their grandparents. Right, just one more slide. I'm going to go back through this to those 2 kids because I can't do anything about my mum and my brothers. They're gone. But I can do something, and you can do something about these 2 kids.